Hollywood has always dazzled the world with its shimmering lights, red carpets, and flawless icons. For decades, movie stars were worshipped as heroes and legends, untouchable in their beauty and talent. But behind the golden glow lay a much darker reality, one that Paul Newman dared to reveal. Beneath the smiles, applause, and Oscars were hidden stories of cruelty, abuse, and scandals far more terrifying than the villains on screen. What Newman exposed shattered the illusion of Hollywood's golden age, reminding us that fame can hide shadows deeper than anyone ever imagined. Errol Flynn, Robin Hood's Darkest Secrets. To millions of moviegoers in the 1930s and 1940s, Errol Flynn was the embodiment of swashbuckling charm. With his radiant smile, mischievous eyes, and fearless energy, he became Hollywood's most dazzling hero. Audiences around the world flocked to theaters to watch him leap across castle walls and sword fight his way into legend in The Adventures of Robin Hood. At the time, Photoplay magazine gushed that he was the man every woman wanted and every man longed to be. On the screen, Flynn was more than an actor. He was an icon of adventure, romance, and daring masculinity. Yet beneath that glittering image was a darker story. Hollywood insiders whispered about his private life, where reckless indulgence and troubling behavior replaced heroism. The climax of those whispers came in 1942, when Flynn faced trial in Los Angeles on charges involving two underage girls. Newspapers devoured the scandal. The Los Angeles Examiner plastered front pages with the blazing headline, "Robin Hood in the Dock." The irony was cruel. Cinema's most famous outlaw now stood accused as a criminal himself. In court, prosecutors painted disturbing scenes inside a Hollywood Hills apartment where Flynn hosted wild, all-night parties. An anonymous witness described a smoke-filled room echoing with laughter and populated by faces far too young to belong there. Journalists crowded the trial, fans lined the sidewalks, and even international correspondents came to witness Robin Hood's reckoning. Yet the verdict shocked many. Errol Flynn was acquitted. Striding out of court, he lit a cigarette, smirked, and told reporters, "The ladies will still love this Robin Hood." To Paul Newman, who later reflected on the case, that single remark revealed a naked arrogance unlike anything he had ever seen. Hollywood trade papers spun the outcome as a victory, with Variety calling it Robin Hood's triumph over justice. But those closer to the industry knew the truth, that Flynn's acquittal was not just about evidence. It was about power. Behind the scenes, Warner Brothers and other major players worked tirelessly to shield their profitable star. Journalists were discouraged from digging too deep, and uncomfortable stories disappeared before they reached print. Even so, rumors persisted. Columnist Sheila Graham later wrote that if the walls of Flynn's Mulholland Drive mansion could talk, they would tell stories Hollywood would never allow to be heard. Accounts from servants and anonymous memoirs added chilling layers, tales of endless parties, young guests, forced performances, and anyone who resisted being swiftly cast out and even blacklisted. Flynn's death in 1959 at just 50 years old only deepened the sense of unease. Though still celebrated on screen, his body told another story. A coroner's report described him as having the organs of a man decades older, worn down by years of indulgence. Financial troubles and debts haunted his final years, while whispers of his misdeeds never faded. The New York Post summed up the paradox with a biting headline, "Robin Hood dead, leaves behind films and secrets." And yet, even in death, the legend endured. Hollywood chose to remember the daring hero with a sword in hand, not the troubling figure hidden behind the mask. Errol Flynn remained immortalized as Robin Hood, the dashing outlaw who stole from the rich and gave to the poor. But Paul Newman's words remind us of the darker truth. Sometimes the most celebrated heroes carry shadows deeper than any villain they ever played. Joan Crawford, Hollywood's queen, her children's tyrant. Joan Crawford was one of Hollywood's most admired women. On screen, she dazzled with elegance, talent, and fierce charisma. She embodied strength and resilience, often portraying women who overcame hardship with glamour and grit. The public adored her, the studios promoted her as Hollywood's reborn queen, and in 1946, she stood on the Academy Awards stage, radiant in a satin gown, clutching her Oscar for Mildred Pierce. The press hailed her as America's comeback star. Life magazine crowned her the picture of a devoted mother, showing her surrounded by her 4 adopted children in glowing family portraits. But Paul Newman once warned in a 1979 New York Times interview, "Never believe that an Oscar can hide the darkness within a family. Joan Crawford is the clearest proof." Behind the closed doors of her Brentwood mansion, Crawford was no nurturing mother. According to witnesses and her own daughter Christina, whose memoir Mommy Dearest became a cultural shockwave, the actress turned motherhood into a private horror show. Hours after the Academy celebrated her Oscar victory, a maid recalled Crawford storming into Christina's bedroom, dragging the 11-year-old out of bed, and forcing her to sing the national anthem in front of a mirror. When the frightened girl faltered, Crawford slapped her across the face so hard she collapsed onto the marble floor. The punishments grew darker. Clothes hangers became weapons, swung like whips. Heavy glass ashtrays were hurled in fits of rage. Christina's classmates remembered her wearing long sleeves, even in the scorching Los Angeles summer, hiding bruises from relentless beatings. Crawford's cruelty was not only physical, it was psychological, ritualistic, and unrelenting. She forced Christina to stand motionless while an hourglass drained, doubling the punishment if a single grain of sand tipped out of place. On other nights, she made her kneel for hours in front of a crucifix, screaming, "You should thank God for having me as your mother." The contrast between public image and private life was chilling. Photographers captured the glamorous family, smiles wide, perfect children arranged like accessories to Hollywood's queen. But behind those images, Christina later said, lay fear and manipulation. Life magazine's 1950 cover presented Crawford as the epitome of maternal devotion. But on the day of that photo shoot, photographer Lawrence Schiller recalled Christina had been beaten so severely that her comb snapped while she tried to fix her hair minutes before smiling for the camera. Even after Crawford's death in 1977, the torment did not end. When her will was read in a Manhattan law office, the room froze. The actress had disinherited Christina and her brother Christopher with the chilling line, "For reasons which they well know." Attorneys described it as the coldest will in Hollywood history. A lawyer present whispered, "It was the only time I saw a mother take revenge on her children even after death." Paul Newman, reflecting years later in an interview with Esquire, said bluntly, "Crawford may have been a queen on screen, but at home she was a tyrant. The most terrifying thing is that she still found ways to punish her children even in death." The story of Joan Crawford is not just about a celebrated actress. It is about the haunting duality of fame, the radiant public image hiding unspeakable private torment. For fans, she was the Oscar-winning legend who defied Hollywood's ageism and fought her way back to the top. For her children, she was a jailer, a tormentor, a shadow they never escaped. To this day, Crawford's legacy splits sharply. Some remember her dazzling performances and groundbreaking career. Others cannot forget the image of wire hangers, bruises hidden under long sleeves, and a will designed to wound from beyond the grave. She remains proof of Newman's warning. Behind every glittering Oscar, there may lie a darkness no camera ever captured. Bing Crosby, the King of Christmas, the Nightmare at Home. For millions of fans, Bing Crosby was the voice of comfort. His smooth baritone turned White Christmas into the best-selling song of all time, and his warm screen persona made him America's ideal father figure. Life magazine presented him in picture-perfect family scenes, while NBC called him the nation's model of tradition. To the outside world, Crosby was the man who gave joy, stability, and holiday cheer. Behind closed doors, however, his family remembered a very different man. Gary Crosby, his eldest son, later revealed in his memoir Going My Own Way that nights at home were filled with dread. He described lying awake, heart racing at the sound of approaching footsteps. What the public viewed as discipline often became relentless punishment, leaving scars that never faded. Appearing years later on television, Gary broke down as he confessed that his father never hugged him, never spoke with kindness, only with cold control and strict demands. The damage went beyond Gary. His brothers struggled for years under the weight of that upbringing. Friends recalled how holiday songs, meant to inspire joy, instead triggered anxiety and fear in the Crosby household. The music that brought peace to millions became, for them, a reminder of nights they longed to forget. Others outside the family caught glimpses of the darker truth. A former touring musician told the Los Angeles Times in 1992 that he once stood near Crosby's dressing room and overheard raised voices, the sharp crack of impact, followed by a child's muffled sobs, and then silence. Everyone knew, but no one spoke. To speak out against Bing Crosby, Hollywood's golden angel, was to end a career. When these revelations came to light in the 1980s, the public debated whether Crosby's strictness was simply the product of his own difficult childhood. Psychologists suggested he had repeated the same harsh patterns he endured from his parents, but Paul Newman rejected such excuses completely. At a 1985 Hollywood Reporter panel, he remarked, "Don't blame his childhood. He demanded obedience because he enjoyed the power. On stage, he controlled a crowd with his voice. At home, he wanted the same control over his family." Perhaps the most chilling part of the Crosby story is not only what his children endured, but how Hollywood chose to look the other way. The studios, the networks, and the press needed him to remain the King of Christmas, the beloved face of American entertainment. And so, the voices of those who suffered were drowned out by the sound of White Christmas playing on repeat. Bing Crosby's legacy remains divided. For the public, he is still the man who gave the world timeless songs and unforgettable films. For his family, he was a figure of fear. Paul Newman's words serve as a reminder. Behind the glittering image of Hollywood's golden age often lay shadows no one wanted to see. Marlene Dietrich, the goddess who played hearts like cards. Few stars in Hollywood history commanded a room the way Marlene Dietrich did. On screen, she was mesmerizing, smoky-voiced, sharp-eyed, and impossibly glamorous. Off-screen, her entrances were legendary. In 1955, at a high society gathering in Beverly Hills, the doors opened and there she was, dressed in a black tuxedo, cigarette holder in hand, eyes like blades. Conversation stopped. A Los Angeles Times reporter later recalled, "The room dropped a few degrees the moment she walked in." It wasn't just beauty. It was power, the kind that made people feel both drawn in and unnerved. Dietrich was more than the star of the Blue Angel. She was a strategist. Relationships to her were not about love or companionship. They were about leverage. Every romance, whether with a man or a woman, was a calculated move in her ongoing game of influence. Among men, her pattern was striking. French cinema legend Jean Gabin was once believed to be the love of her life. Yet when she left him, his world collapsed. Friends said he retreated into isolation, devastated by her sudden abandonment. The celebrated German writer Erich Maria Remarque, author of All Quiet on the Western Front, was treated more like a bank than a partner. Whenever Dietrich appeared, his royalties seemed to vanish into her shopping trips, extravagant parties, and luxury indulgences. Her impact on women could be even more devastating. Rumors tied her to Greta Garbo, Hollywood's elusive ice goddess. Not long after their alleged connection, Garbo withdrew further into solitude, vanishing from the public eye for decades. With screenwriter Mercedes de Acosta, Dietrich was said to have exploited her influence in Hollywood before discarding her. De Acosta, once a prominent figure, ended up shunned and forgotten, dying in obscurity. Even celebrated actress Claudette Colbert wasn't immune to the whispers, her reputation shadowed for years after a rumored entanglement with Dietrich. The story of Edith Piaf in Paris revealed an even darker outcome. After her affair with Dietrich ended, Piaf's struggles with alcohol and pills intensified. Friends recalled her breaking down backstage, sobbing that she had loved a woman who treated her devotion as disposable. One confidant said Dietrich's shadow was like a storm Piaf could never escape. And it wasn't only lovers who bore the cost. In Hollywood, an anonymous 1961 report described a young actress who gave up $1 million contract to follow Dietrich. When the relationship ended, her career collapsed. She fell into debt and despair. Not long after, she was found dead in her Santa Monica apartment, leaving behind a bitter note with just 3 words, "I hate you." Even Dietrich's daughter, Maria Riva, was caught in the same web. In her 1992 memoir, Riva described a childhood of neglect. She was often left backstage or alone in hotel rooms while her mother pursued affairs and power games. For Dietrich, love and motherhood were not nurturing bonds but props in a larger performance. Scholars later suggested that Dietrich's relentless pursuit of control dated back to her youth in Germany, where she learned that charm and seduction could open doors barred to others. To her, emotions weren't meant to be shared. They were meant to be used. She treated affection like a deck of cards, shuffling, dealing, and discarding as the game required. Paul Newman, who had crossed paths with her but managed to stay outside her orbit, summed it up bluntly in a 1983 CBS interview. Marlene treated human emotion like playing cards, and she played the game better than anyone. But behind her, all you saw were losers. That is the paradox of Marlene Dietrich. She was an icon of allure, intelligence, and defiance, a woman who rewrote the rules of femininity in Hollywood. Yet behind the icon was a manipulator who left a trail of broken hearts, ruined lives, and lasting scars. For some, she remains the goddess of glamour. For others, she will always be remembered as the woman who turned love itself into a ruthless game. Mickey Rooney, Hollywood's golden boy with a dark shadow. To the public, Mickey Rooney was the boy wonder of Hollywood's golden age. Bursting with charm, energy, and a mischievous grin, he became MGM's money machine. The Andy Hardy series alone earned the studio millions, and in 1939, Life magazine hailed him as the little star with the biggest smile in Hollywood. He was the embodiment of American innocence, the cheerful boy audiences adored. But behind the curtain, a very different Rooney emerged, volatile, manipulative, and frightening to those closest to him. The most haunting testimony came from Elizabeth Taylor. At just 14 years old, she confided years later that Rooney terrified her more than anyone else in Hollywood. During the filming of National Velvet in 1944, Taylor was MGM's most precious jewel, a young actress destined for stardom. Yet instead of protection, she found herself in the orbit of a man nearly 10 years older, already one of the studio's top stars. Classmates from Taylor's acting lessons later recalled that she wore heavy sweaters even in the middle of summer, trying to shield herself from his gaze. One friend described how Taylor once squeezed her hand, whispering, "I just want to get out of here as quickly as possible." The young actress's diary entries from that time, later revealed by her family, recorded sleepless nights, feelings of being trapped, and a growing fear that MGM was a gilded cage rather than a dream factory. Rooney's behavior backstage only confirmed the darker picture. A lighting technician told the Los Angeles Times that Rooney could beam for the camera, then moments later erupt in fury, screaming and hurling props if something went wrong. The public saw a charming boy next door. Insiders saw a star whose moods and obsessions were dangerous, particularly toward vulnerable co-stars like Taylor. Yet Hollywood closed ranks. MGM, desperate to protect its golden goose, ensured Rooney's reputation remained spotless. Gossip columnists like Hedda Hopper hinted at troubling behavior, but were swiftly forced to retract their words. A former editor admitted that writing anything negative about Rooney was strictly forbidden. Mickey Rooney must remain innocent. Any journalist who said otherwise was finished. The silence was enforced not only by the studio's lawyers, but also by the culture of Hollywood itself, where money and image mattered far more than truth. Rooney's personal life mirrored his chaotic reputation. He married 8 times, some unions lasting only a few months. His ex-wife, Ava Gardner, bluntly told reporters that living with him was like living through a storm, always waiting for the next outburst. Behind closed doors, he was said to bully younger actresses and exploit the power MGM gave him, confident that no one would dare hold him accountable. As the years passed, his career declined. The boy who once symbolized Hollywood's youth and vitality spiraled into financial ruin, debts, and gambling losses. At one point, the man once called America's little darling relied on welfare and lawyers just to protect him from family disputes. Paul Newman later reflected on Rooney's double life. At a 1982 press conference, he remarked, "Hollywood has smiles that hide darkness, and sometimes that darkness is more terrifying than the villains on screen. Mickey Rooney was the clearest proof of that deceit." In the end, Rooney's story is not simply about a fading star, but about a system that protected him for decades. On screen, he was the boy America trusted. Off-screen, he left behind a trail of fear and broken trust. Kirk Douglas, Spartacus on screen, Predator off it. To audiences, Kirk Douglas was the ultimate American hero. With his chiseled jawline, fiery eyes, and commanding presence, he embodied strength and resilience. His role as Spartacus became a symbol of freedom and defiance, inspiring generations of viewers. Presidents praised him, critics honored him, and Hollywood celebrated him as one of its greatest icons. But behind that heroic image, rumors circulated for decades about a darker side, a man whose power was used not only on screen but against the vulnerable in his private life. The most disturbing story surfaced in connection with Natalie Wood. In the summer of 1954, Wood was just 15 years old when her mother arranged a meeting with Douglas at the Chateau Marmont Hotel, believing it could help advance her daughter's career. According to Lana Wood's memoir, Little Sister, Natalie returned from that meeting shaken, her clothes disheveled, and her eyes filled with fear. In her diary, she wrote that she felt filthy, as if everything had been stolen. Her mother urged her to stay silent if she wanted to keep working in Hollywood. That silence lasted for decades. When Natalie later died under mysterious circumstances in 1981, drowning off the coast of Catalina Island, some journalists questioned whether the shadows of her teenage years were connected to her tragic end. But the trail quickly went cold. In Hollywood, speaking against Douglas meant challenging one of the industry's most untouchable stars, a man the studios considered a golden asset. Natalie was not the only one. Former Paramount employees claimed Douglas often invited very young women into his dressing room. Those who refused, they said, found their careers abruptly stalled. Rumors even spread that he kept videotaped records of encounters locked away in a private safe, though no proof ever surfaced. Whether myth or reality, the persistence of these stories revealed how many believed his power was shielded by Hollywood's silence. And yet, despite the whispers, Douglas's public reputation only grew brighter. In 1996, President Bill Clinton awarded him the Medal of Freedom, calling him a national treasure. In 2004, he received an honorary Oscar for his illustrious career. Standing frail but proud on the stage, Douglas told the world how honored he was to inspire young people. The audience applauded, but behind the polite smiles, some veteran actresses exchanged uneasy glances. They knew that the legend being celebrated was not the same man they remembered. Paul Newman, in a 1985 60 Minutes interview, cut through the applause with a blunt statement. "Spartacus may have been a hero, but Kirk Douglas was never a hero. At least not to the young girls he hunted." That is the contradiction of Douglas's legacy. On film, he was a champion of the oppressed, a gladiator who defied tyranny. Off film, he left behind rumors of manipulation, coercion, and abuse. Hollywood chose to immortalize Spartacus while burying the shadows of the man who played him, Bette Davis, Hollywood's violent queen. Bette Davis was hailed as one of the most powerful actresses of Hollywood's golden age. With blazing eyes, razor-sharp delivery, and an ability to turn even a single line into a weapon, she earned her place among cinema's legends. Films like All About Eve cemented her reputation as a genius of the screen. But away from the camera, Davis carried a temper so ferocious it turned entire sets into battlegrounds. To many who worked with her, she wasn't just a star, she was a storm. The most infamous example came during the filming of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane in 1962. The movie made history not only for its chilling performances, but for the brutal war between Davis and her co-star Joan Crawford. On set, the tension was palpable. In one scene, Davis was meant to shove Crawford to the floor. Instead of acting, she used her full strength, leaving Crawford bruised and hospitalized. When asked later about the incident, Davis coldly replied, "I was just doing my job. If she got hurt, that's her problem." Crawford retaliated in her own way. In another scene where Davis had to drag her across the floor, Crawford secretly sewed metal weights into her costume. The effort nearly injured Davis's spine, leaving her in pain for weeks. A crew member later said, "No one could tell where the acting stopped and the hatred began. They turned the film into torture." But Crawford was not Davis's only victim. Her reputation for physical outbursts went back decades. On the set of The Private Lives of Elizabeth and Essex, 1939, she slapped Errol Flynn so hard that the red mark lingered on his face in front of the entire crew. Flynn later admitted he felt more humiliated in that moment than in any real fight he'd ever had. In All This and Heaven 2, 1940, a young supporting actor forgot a line. Davis struck him on the head with a script in full view of the cast. The actor quit Hollywood soon after, saying working with Davis felt like living in a military camp under constant threat. Even crew members were not spared. A Warner Brothers script clerk once confessed in her diary that whenever the echo of Davis's heels was heard in the hallway, everyone froze. Makeup artists, extras, even directors braced themselves for her fury. One assistant recalled, "She could silence a room faster than a director yelling, 'Cut!' People didn't admire her, they feared her." Paul Newman, who witnessed Davis berate a young actress until she burst into tears, summed up the paradox in an interview with Esquire. "No one denies Bette's talent, but I've never seen a woman spread so much fear on a film set." Bette Davis's career remains iconic, her performances unforgettable. Yet her legacy carries a shadow. She was a woman who turned every stage into a battlefield, every co-star into a potential victim. Hollywood crowned her its queen, but for those forced to work under her, she was remembered less for her brilliance than for the fear she left behind. Wallace Beery, Hollywood's brutal giant behind the gentle mask. To moviegoers of the 1930s, Wallace Beery was the lovable tough guy with a heart of gold. His Academy Award-winning role in The Champ, 1931, made audiences weep as he played a gruff but tender father figure. He was one of MGM's most bankable stars, frequently ranked among the highest-paid actors of his time. On screen, he was the warm giant whose strength was matched by compassion. But behind that gentle mask, Beery carried a reputation for violence that Hollywood worked hard to bury. The darkest shadow over Beery's legacy was his link to the mysterious death of Ted Healy, the man who founded the Three Stooges. On December 21, 1937, Healy was involved in a violent altercation outside the Trocadero nightclub on Sunset Boulevard. Witnesses later claimed that a large man resembling Beery delivered punches as heavy as hammers. Hours later, Healy was found dead in his hotel room, his body covered in bruises. The official cause was quickly listed as alcohol poisoning, but the timing and the injuries raised suspicions. Just 3 days later, MGM quietly arranged for Beery to leave for Europe, effectively removing him from the scandal. The LAPD closed the case with little investigation, and Hollywood moved on. To many, it was one of the most blatant cover-ups in industry history. Beery's violence was not confined to late-night brawls. On MGM sets, he was infamous for mistreating child actors. Mickey Rooney himself once recalled that Beery, built like a bear, enjoyed proving his strength by striking or tossing children around. One young performer remembered being squeezed on the shoulder so hard that it bruised purple for days. Crew members later admitted that hush money was quietly handed to families who dared to complain. To the studios, Beery was too profitable to lose. Silencing the victims was far easier than confronting the truth. His personal life was no less disturbing. Beery's marriage to screen icon Gloria Swanson ended in disaster. Swanson later revealed in her memoir that she had endured physical abuse, describing Beery as a man who only knew fists and brute force. The relationship collapsed under the weight of his aggression, leaving Swanson desperate to escape at any cost. Paul Newman, reflecting on Beery's career in an interview with Esquire in 1981, frowned as he spoke. Hollywood knew these secrets well, but they chose to build legends instead of facing the truth. On screen, Beery played the tender father. Off-screen, he spread terror with his fists. This contradiction became the defining mark of Wallace Beery's legacy. To audiences, he was the comforting giant who tugged at heartstrings. To those who worked with him or suffered at his hands, he was a brutal man shielded by the power of MGM and the silence of an industry eager to protect its image. The suspicious death of Ted Healy, the mistreatment of child actors, the abusive marriage, all of it was brushed aside so Hollywood could keep selling the myth of Beery the gentle giant. History now paints a different picture. Wallace Beery may have been celebrated as one of the great stars of Hollywood's golden age, but behind the curtain, he embodied its darkest hypocrisy, the choice to glorify monsters while silencing their victims. Gloria Swanson, the diva who destroyed her own kingdom. In the 1920s, Gloria Swanson reigned as Hollywood's undisputed queen of silent film. Draped in sequins, fur coats trailing behind her, she glided across red carpets like royalty. Photoplay magazine gushed that she didn't just act in films. She lived as though life itself were a stage. To audiences, she embodied glamour, power, and sophistication. But for those forced to work with her, Swanson's colossal ego turned productions into nightmares and left wreckage in her wake. The clearest example came with the doomed film Queen Kelly in 1928. What began as a bold cinematic experiment quickly dissolved into chaos. Swanson demanded entire costumes be scrapped because the color didn't match her eyes, sets rebuilt simply to inspire her mood, and endless retakes to satisfy her whims. Crew members collapsed from exhaustion, while director Erich von Stroheim screamed in despair as budgets spiraled out of control. In the end, he was fired. The production was abandoned, and hundreds of workers lost their jobs. What had started as a triumph of ambition became one of Hollywood's most infamous flops, all to satisfy the ego of its star. Her extravagance went beyond the studio lot. Even during the Great Depression, when millions of Americans lined up for bread, Swanson lived as though the crash of 1929 had never touched her. The New York Herald Tribune reported that she once commissioned a gown encrusted with thousands of crystals, worth the savings of an entire middle-class family, just to wear it once at a charity gala. Journalists bitterly noted that while ordinary people begged for food, Swanson was busy encrusting her gloves with diamonds. As the silent era faded and sound films rose, Swanson's refusal to adapt left her career adrift. Instead of reinventing herself, she blamed directors, producers, and even audiences whom she dismissed as too unsophisticated to appreciate her artistry. Hollywood, once captivated by her radiance, began to turn away. Isolated and bitter, she retreated into opulence, surrounding herself with mirrors, gowns, and jewels, but few admirers. Her most famous return came in Sunset Boulevard, 1950, where she played Norma Desmond, an aging, silent star trapped in delusion. The performance was brilliant, but chillingly close to reality. Audiences shuddered because Swanson wasn't simply acting. She was reflecting her own downfall, her own desperate clinging to a world that had moved on. Paul Newman later remarked that some stars believe luxury will keep them forever at the top. But Hollywood never forgives those who destroy entire productions for their ego. Gloria Swanson's brilliance had turned to ashes, her vanity consuming not only her own career, but the lives of countless others along the way. Hollywood's golden age promised magic, dreams, and larger-than-life heroes. But behind the shimmering lights, it was also a stage where devils wore the clothing of stars. The actors we admired as legends were often the same figures who left scars on those around them: children, co-stars, and even their own families. Victims were silenced, while predators were shielded and celebrated. Paul Newman's words forced audiences to confront this contradiction, but his own silence raised another chilling question. Was he a brave whistleblower, or simply another player in the system he condemned? The lesson for us is clear. Fame can dazzle, but it can also deceive. Admiring talent should never blind us to truth. Every industry, whether Hollywood or beyond, must be willing to confront its shadows, to protect the vulnerable, and to ensure that no spotlight is ever bright enough to hide the darkest of sins.